So Israel started a war that they cannot finish on their own. The United States is already involved, and I believe Israel, and I think everybody believes that Israel expects the United States to finish the job. Their so-called Iron Dome is leaking like Swiss cheese right now, and they're being hit a lot more than they're willing to admit publicly. I know this because it's leaking on the internet. Their cities are taking a lot of damage. So Iran has a lot more missiles than the Israeli intelligence originally believed. If you look at what their stated goals are and the stated policies, they say they want to take out Iran's nuclear program because, according to their intelligence, that they're on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon. Well, I take that with a grain of salt, considering that this is something that's been talked about for decades. I haven't seen the intelligence report. Really, nobody has. Do you really believe the people that are saying that? Some of these people that are saying that have already lost all credibility. Okay, so you just think of like the neocons, for example. Netanyahu himself has no credibility at all. You look at, they're talking about regime change. Well, yeah, granted, there are a lot of minorities in Iran that don't like the government. A lot of the people in Iran don't like how things are run. However, a lot of these people are still nationalists. They might not like the way the Ayatollah and the mullahs run things, but nonetheless, if they're attacked, they are nationalists, and I believe that politically the regime would actually become stronger. In fact, I suspect that it's getting stronger right now politically. So this talk that the Iranians, the Persians, and all the other ethnic groups are going to greet Americans or Israelis as liberators. You'll get some people, a very small minority, but I don't think that's going to happen for two reasons. Number one, it's never happened before. It's never worked like that before. I mean, you'd have to go back to World War II with Germany, and Germans were surrendering to the West only to get away from the Soviets. Iraq, Americans were not greeted as liberators. They were not greeted as liberators in Afghanistan. They were not greeted as liberators in places like Serbia back in the early 90s. So we're not going to be greeted as liberators, okay? And even in the second reason why, unless you're willing to stay and occupy that area, those that do see the Americans as liberators, they're going to be too scared. They're not going to come out and greet them as liberators only for the Americans to leave and them going to be executed by the Iranian regime. Okay, so without significant boots on the ground, there's not going to be regime change. Which brings me to my next point. You want to go to war with Iran, you would need a very fit population of young men. Okay, you would need an industrial capacity that is immune to supply shocks from the Persian Gulf being cut off. That means that we don't have a bunch of supply chain steps in East Asia, which depend on Middle Eastern oil, whether Israeli attacks the Iranian oil fields or the Iranians close the Persian Gulf there, the Straits of Hormuz. If that happens, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, they don't get their oil because most of their oil comes from the Persian Gulf. The supply chains would shut down, and the manufacturing supply chain steps that we need, that we still integrate with in East Asia, would get shut down. So we don't have an industrial base like we did in World War II because we shipped some of that overseas. So we don't have. So let me go back for a second. We're talking about the young population. According to the military, there is a good chunk of the Zoomer generation that are not either mentally or physically fit for military service. We have obesity. We have a mental health crisis. We got people that are on drugs. We have a drug crisis. Not to mention, this brings me to my third point. You need political, some form of political cohesion. You need to be more or less, people need to be more or less on the same page. We don't have that. We got people openly talking about the possibility of civil war in this country. Right before this whole thing happened, there were riots in Los Angeles, and some people were calling them mostly peaceful. We're in no shape physically, politically / philosophically, morally. We're in no shape economically / industrially to fight a war on the scale that would be necessary to do regime change in Iran. Now that brings me to another point. Here's another vulnerability. We have 30 plus million illegal immigrants in the United States. Some of them have been identified as Hezbollah operatives, Hezbollah terrorists that are a proxy to Iran. So it would not be difficult for Iran to activate these people. We would have terrorist attacks here in the United States. Now, just remember that for a little bit later on, because I'll come back to that. So the United States maybe technically could do a lot of damage to their nuclear program by sea and air, but there's not going to be a ground force operation because the United States is not capable of that, and everybody who pays attention to the situation knows that. It's not some big secret. We lack the ground force capacity, and so does Israel because it's a small country, to pull that off. So that brings me to some other points that I want to make. Let's talk about the stated reasons about getting involved, about the intelligence reports, which we should take with a grain of salt. The regime change idea, which is complete bull. The idea of we need to defend Israel because it's a prosperous, semi-free country that's very small and apparently can't finish a war that it started. Therefore, we must help because as Americans, we're supposed to protect freedom all over the world. Well, I'll say this to that point. Rhodesia was in a very similar situation to Israel. It's a prosperous, semi-free country that was the envy of a combined population larger than that in Africa. And not only did we not defend that country against the communists, I might add, but we put sanctions on that country. You know, how dare you defend yourself against communists? You know, your mostly free country, your prosperous country from these envious communists. So why is it okay for Israel to do this, but not Rhodesia, not the British settlers in Rhodesia? Well, there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, that this liberation ideology from the left, you know, this is supposedly Africa's homeland, and you're not allowed to have settlers. Well, you know, that doesn't make any sense because you could say the same thing. Well, I mean, Israel is on Arab land, right? You know, it's this liberation BS. But that's because Rhodesia didn't have an extensive lobby in D.C. That's what this comes down to. So it's not because it's American foreign policy to protect small, free countries. It's just that Israel has an extensive lobby and they have more representation than Americans do, unfortunately, or as it seems. So that brings me to another point, is I have to start searching for motives here. And I think about the timing. This came right when there were riots in Los Angeles because the left have to protect these coveted illegal migrants. Because that's going to be the voting bloc. That's there to give these states more census power and congressional seats so that they can dominate the political future because they don't have an argument to make, so they have to cheat elections, and they do it in part by using illegal immigrants. And plus, it's a destabilizing force. It's there to lower wages, et cetera, et cetera. I suspect that Benjamin Netanyahu, like a lot of the elites, hate American nationalists. Absolutely hates American nationalists. So not only is Iran his enemy, but a large segment of the American people is also his enemy. He hates us, hates us. And this was right on time to prevent America from getting their act together, from solving this situation politically. So with these Hezbollah operatives, this would be a perfect time for them to launch a false flag attack so that you can stir up public opinion to get involved in the war in Iran. And of course, mark my words, they'll say, "Oh, it's not because it was an illegal migrant." That, they're going to claim that it came here legally, so that you don't blame the immigrants, right? Because they love the immigrants. It'll be a false flag attack. Israel will be behind it. The Israeli state, not Israeli people, but Mossad will be in part behind this. And it'll do that to stir up public opinion to do what Israel wants them to do, and also as an attack, as a means of further declaring war on American nationalists.